Here's a story I really like. It's called The Tortoise and the Hare. Once upon a time, there lived a hare who was always boasting of his great speed. "There is no one in the forest who can run as fast as I," he said as he strutted back and forth before all the other animals. "Who would like to race me?" Tired as they were of his boasting, none of the animals ever offered to race him until one morning the tortoise got up from where he had been resting, stretched out his stubby little legs and said, "I will race you, hare." The hare began to laugh because everyone in the forest knew that the tortoise was the slowest of them all. "Ho ho," he chuckled, "I can beat you without half trying."
"Let us wait until you have won the race," said the tortoise. "Then you can begin your boasting."
The race course was laid out through the forest, and all the animals gathered around to see the start. The hare took off with a great burst of speed that left the tortoise in a cloud of dust. After a few minutes, the hare looked back, but the tortoise was not in sight. He sat down in the shade of a big tree and decided to wait until the tortoise came into view. He soon became bored with waiting, began to yawn, and finally, he fell asleep. Meanwhile, the tortoise was plodding along the hot, dusty road. He moved ever so slowly on his stubby little legs, but he never paused for a moment. As he passed the hare, sleeping by the roadside, he stretched out his neck, gave the hare a glance, and without making a sound, crawled on his way. The hare suddenly awoke with a start. He looked down the road and saw that the tortoise was nearing the finish line. All of the animals stood around cheering. He jumped to his feet and tore down the road after the tortoise. But by the time he got there, the race was over. The tortoise had won. The hare had lost the race by being careless and overconfident. He would never boast again, and all of the animals, including the tortoise, were very happy about that.
Hi, this is Gordon, and of all the stories in Big Bird's collection, my favorite is The Three Little Pigs. Once upon a time, there were three little pigs who lived with their mother on a farm. Soon it became time for the three little pigs to go out into the wide, wide world to seek their fortunes. Early one morning, the three little pigs started out, each one taking a different road. The first little pig walked along until he met a man with a load of straw. "Please, sir," said the first little pig, "may I have some straw? I wish to build a house." So the man gave the first little pig enough straw to build a house. It was no sooner built than a big, bad wolf came along. "Little pig, let me come in," he called. "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," answered the first little pig. "Then I'll puff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. But the first little pig wouldn't let him come in. So the wolf huffed, and he puffed, and he blew the house in. But while the wolf was huffing and puffing, the first little pig ran out the back door and hurried over the hill to the farm where his mother lived. Now the second little pig was walking along, and he met a man with a load of sticks. "Please, sir," said the second little pig, "may I have some sticks? I wish to build a house." The man gave the second little pig enough sticks to build a house. It was no sooner built than the same big bad wolf came along. Little pig, let me come in," he called. "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," answered the second little pig. "Then I'll huff, and I'll puff, and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. But the second little pig wouldn't let him come in. So the wolf huffed and he puffed and he blew the house in. But while the wolf was huffing and puffing, the second little pig ran out the back door and hurried over the hill to the farm where his mother lived. Now, the third little pig was walking along when he met a man with a load of bricks. "Please, sir," said the third little pig, "may I have some bricks? I wish to build a house." The man gave the third little pig enough bricks to build a house. It was no sooner built than the same big bad wolf came along. "Little pig, let me come in," he called. "Not by the hair of my chinny chin chin," answered the third little pig. "Then I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house in," said the wolf. But the third little pig wouldn't let him come in. So the wolf huffed and he puffed and he huffed and he puffed, but he couldn't blow the house in. The big bad wolf sat down to rest for a moment. Then, in a very friendly voice, he called out, "Little pig, tomorrow there is to be a great fair in the village. Why don't you meet me there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I will be glad to show you some of the best bargains." The next afternoon, the third little pig arrived at the fair at 2 o'clock and bought a new barrel in which to store his turnips and apples. He was on his way home with it when he saw the big bad wolf walking up the road. There was no place to hide, so the third little pig jumped into the barrel, which began rolling down the hill, straight towards the big bad wolf. The wolf turned and ran down the hill. Faster and faster rolled the barrel. Faster and faster ran the wolf. He was so frightened that at last he ran into the woods and was never seen again. The barrel continued to roll until it reached the third little pig's house, where it finally stopped. The third little pig climbed out of the barrel. Then he walked over to the farm where his mother lived and invited his two brothers to come and live with him. That evening, the three little pigs dined on roasted turnips and fresh apple pie. And, as far as anyone knows, they all lived happily ever after.
Hola, yo soy Maria. My name's Maria, and the story I'm about to read to you is not only one of Big Bird's favorites, but it's my favorite too. The story's called The Shoemaker and the Elves. Once upon a time, in a small country village, there lived a poor shoemaker and his wife. One afternoon, the shoemaker discovered that he had only enough leather left to make one more pair of shoes. With a heavy heart, he cut them out, and leaving the pieces on his workbench, went slowly up the stairs to the small room over the shop where he and his wife lived. As they sat down to their meager supper, she said, "Well, my husband, did we sell any shoes today?" "No," he replied. "There was only enough leather for one more pair. I have just finished cutting them out, and tomorrow morning I must stitch them and hope that we will have a customer." Early the next morning, the shoemaker hurried down the stairs, and there on the workbench was the most beautiful pair of shoes he had ever seen. He was very surprised and did not know what to think. He picked up the shoes and examined them carefully. They were very sturdy, with tiny, neat stitches that had obviously been made by a fine craftsman. Soon, a customer came into the shop. The shoes fit him exactly, and since they were so well made, he bought them and paid more than the shoemaker had asked. The poor shoemaker was overjoyed, for now he had money to buy leather for 2 more pairs of shoes with enough left over for a fine dinner. He quickly set off to make his purchase, and by supper time he had cut out the shoes and left them on the workbench, ready to be stitched the next day. He hummed softly as he climbed the stairs, for that night he smelled good things in the soup kettle that hadn't been there for a long time. The next morning, the shoemaker could hardly believe his eyes, for there on his workbench were 2 new pairs of fine shoes. Within the hour, a customer arrived who was so pleased with the shoes that he gave the shoemaker enough money to make 4 new pairs. And so day after day, the shoemaker purchased more leather and worked happily at his bench, cutting out twice as many shoes as the day before. And night after night, when the rich fragrance from the soup kettle lured him from his task, he whistled as he climbed the stairs. Try as they might, the fortunate couple could find no explanation for the mysterious events that had brought such a change to their lives. One evening, the shoemaker's wife said, "Why don't we go down to the shop tonight and see for ourselves who is doing all of this work?" Her husband agreed, and late that night they crept down the stairs and peeked through the door that led to the shoemaker's shop. There on the workbench were 2 little elves, stitching and tapping away with such skill and speed that the shoemaker could hardly follow their movements. The husband and wife looked on silently and then went back up the stairs. Back in their cozy room, the wife said, "We should be very grateful to those little elves. They have made us rich. But did you notice their clothes? Why, they're threadbare, and with winter coming, the elves will freeze. I would like to make them some new pants and shirts and coats, and I can knit them some new stockings, and you can make each of them a pair of shoes." The shoemaker readily agreed, and they set right to work on the gifts. Since the elves were very tiny, the clothes were quickly finished and set out on the workbench. The next night, the couple again crept down the stairs and peered into the workshop. There were the elves, beautifully dressed in their new shirts of green, shining silk and soft velvet suits of the richest chocolate brown. As they pulled on the tiny silk stockings and shiny black boots, they danced and laughed and jumped for joy so that the shoemaker and his wife could hardly keep from dancing themselves as they watched. Then, suddenly, the elves stopped, looked around, and ran quickly out the door into the night. They never came back, but the shoemaker and his wife still smile at each other over the soup kettle, remembering their wonderful secret helpers.